I was told that I was not going to live past 30 years old. I'm
Yep.
now like 137 pounds. I was not even half my weight in May of 2019. And I had over 10 autoimmune diseases. I couldn't gain weight to save my life. I'll never forget, one of my functional medicine doctors literally told me, I don't know what else to do. There was a bit of hopelessness, but also I never felt abandoned by God. I had multiple diagnoses. I had so many people say, well, it kind of looks like lupus. I was diagnosed with delayed onset type 1 diabetes. I was diagnosed with so many different things. So my list of diagnoses that I share are the ones that I'm certain I actually had. But if I were to share diagnoses that were thrown around and that people had suspicions of, it would probably be over 20. It was so many different things. People thought I had leukemia. I mean, it was crazy. I had severe mood disorders and digestive issues, and that was primarily due to crest scleroderma, which was actually taking over my internal organs. But I had a host of issues. This chronic C. diff infection, I had already done 3 fecal transplants. They were not sticking. The C. diff kept taking back over. I couldn't gain weight to save my life. So they were telling me that I needed to be hooked up to a feeding tube and to remove my colon due to the inflammation. I first started working with functional medicine doctors in 2017, and they diagnosed me with chronic Lyme disease, Hashimoto's, and Addison's disease. Those were my first diagnoses. I didn't feel hopeless. I actually felt a sense of relief because I had never worked with functional medicine doctors before. I hadn't had anyone actually look at me in a way like they cared. Traditional medicine only called it anxiety and they prescribed more medications. So it was actually relieving to work with people who were looking deeper. And I felt encouraged by that. However, the Lyme literate doctors specifically kind of made it seem like this was my identity. They made it seem like I would need to get treatments, IV treatments for the rest of my life. They never shared like, oh, this will work. At some point, you'll be able to reverse this. I never heard any of that. What I saw were a bunch of people at these clinics who had been going for years, over 10 years, getting these IV therapies, and this was a lifestyle for them. And so that actually scared me. I left because I said, there's no hope here. I would rather die than see my family spend literally every penny that they have on something that's not even going to cure me. That to me is a massive red flag. And so I continued to work with functional medicine doctors. At some point, they kind of just were spinning their wheels. And that's when I started to feel hopeless. I started to feel like a lost cause. My chiropractor was running labs for me. He was trying his best. I was seeing specialists all the time. People were just referring me out. Functional medicine doctors literally told me, I don't know what else to do. And that's why she recommended me to go to UNC Chapel Hill to go see a multi-specialist. The doctors literally petitioned to have me sent to an eating disorder unit where I spent an entire month, which was horrible. That all happened because they didn't know what to do with me. And then just people out in public obviously don't know what's going on, but I'm shrinking. So a lot of people think I have an eating disorder. My family thought I had an eating disorder. After I was treated in the eating disorder unit, they really brainwashed me in there. They said that if you're sensitive to food, then you have orthorexia. It's all in your head. And so I came out of there with an eating disorder. So I felt really hopeless in that department. I couldn't gain weight to save my life. Everyone thinks I have an eating disorder. I have all these diagnoses. I definitely felt like, why? Why is this happening to me? All of my friends were basically graduating college at this point, getting married, having kids, living their lives, and I still, I'm stuck basically right out of high school. I've just been sick and spinning my wheels for years at this point. So there was a bit of hopelessness, but also I never felt abandoned by God. So I came from a background of knowing a lot about the ketogenic diet, and I knew that it was very therapeutic. So I did use that for a lot of my healing. It's just that I took it too far, and at some point it wasn't helping me anymore, primarily due to the oxalate content. I was still eating a lot of baby spinach, avocados, things with high oxalate, turmeric, black pepper. So those are things that I knew from relatives who were in the ketogenic space and really growing up in a home that was low carb for the most part. when I saw doctors, I did go and see Dr. Eric Westman out of Durham, North Carolina. He's a ketogenic doctor, but I cherry picked him. I wanted to work with a ketogenic doctor. So he didn't teach me much about nutrition, but he did stand by my side, encourage me, and validate me in using ketogenesis as a form of therapy for everything I was dealing with. I saw a ketogenic neurological doctor who was actually a children's doctor, and they still accused me of having an eating disorder. So doctors did not give much insight in terms of nutrition. That was pretty much me undertaking it on my own. And that's when I really felt like the Lord was pulling on my heartstrings and pointed out, hey, you've been trusting this ketogenic diet more than me. And I realized that I had been fighting in my own strength and trying to be in control for so long, but I was getting nowhere. I was digging my own grave. And so I really did have a moment of surrender, and my heart posture shifted from a place of fear to a place of faith, surrender and faith. Okay, God, I'm going to watch and see how you provide for me. But what you're calling me to do is to surrender my idols. And so that's what I did. And I didn't know what it was going to look like. But then in that moment of surrender, I really did receive a lot of wisdom and understanding. And it's like something just switched on in my brain. So I realized the carnivore diet really is all about consuming the most bioavailable form of nutrients and removing the anti-nutrients. It makes sense. And so that's what I did. But this time it wasn't from a place of control. I stopped using my glucometer. I stopped tracking my ketones. I stopped trying to micromanage everything. And I really just took it one day at a time. I did quickly discover that histamines were an issue for me. So I discovered non-aged meat with Billy Doe meats. And I spent the next year eating only lamb, salt, and water. And I reversed every single diagnosis. So when I switched from keto to carnivore, it was actually in an emergency room. And I noticed improvements, well, actually in the emergency room. So I was having symptoms from ulcerative colitis. I was getting blood in my stools and I was involuntarily throwing up. And that stopped even in the emergency room. So within, I would say 24, 48 hours, that those symptoms stopped. And then I was also able to gain weight for the first time in over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So I put on 4 pounds in the emergency room in 7 days. They brought the scale in, they weighed me, and they're like, okay, this is whatever you're doing is working. So they said, go home and do your weird all meat diet. And that's what I did. And so even in the first 2 weeks of that, I noticed very significant improvements in my mood and in my energy levels. My mood, such that it's not like I was full of joy and laughter, but I had a backbone again. I wasn't stuck in this place of fight flight mode, and I really felt like, okay, I think I'm getting somewhere. And then my energy levels, I wasn't dragging myself out of bed. Prior to this, I was waking up and like literally just dragging myself out of bed. Now I would wake up maybe around 8:30 and be able to get out of bed and start the day slowly. And I think a lot of that just had to do with not being in such a chronic state of fight flight mode, which is so draining and taxing on the adrenals. So those improvements I noticed pretty quickly within 2 weeks, and then everything else continued to improve. Hypothyroidism was reversed around the 6 month mark. I got my period probably almost exactly 1 year after doing it. I was 104 pounds when I got my period back after not having one for 16 years. My digestion improved, bowel movement consistency improved. My strength obviously was improving as I was gaining healthy weight. Even my satiety levels improved. So even at 69 pounds, I struggled with a binge eating disorder. I was very triggered by the sight of my emaciated body. I wanted to gain weight to save my life. I didn't really have proper leptin signaling at this point. I mean, all of my hormones were pretty much in the toilet. And so I do recall becoming leptin sensitive again and just being able to know that I was done eating, not because I had a stomach stretch, not because I was counting calories, but because I just knew. You're just eating and then you just know when to put your fork down. And I was even putting food away. I wasn't finishing everything on my plate. And that to me was like, wow, I'm really healing. This is really healthy. And that relationship with food started to be restored. And that was a lot of healing that had to happen between myself and food because I had so many symptoms and so many food sensitivities over the years that I really gave myself a lot of time before I reintroduced other foods, partially because I didn't want to deal with symptoms, but also just because I had to heal from the noise. There was so much mental noise around food. And so being able to just eat meat, salt, and water and not have reactions was such a blessing. And that was also very healing. My family had cut me off. We were not in contact because they were convinced that I had an eating disorder. And I said, I'm sorry, there's more to it. I don't have an eating disorder. So we were not in contact at all. And I was living states away. And so I finally did get back in touch with them. I would say maybe it was only like a month and a half or 2 months into the carnivore way of eating when I knew that I was going to be okay, when I knew that I was making progress, and I knew that I wanted to now start coaching and get my certifications. So I actually reached out to them for a loan. I said, hey, I'm healing. I've gained this much weight. I told them it was an all meat diet, but really all they needed to hear was that I was gaining weight and getting healthy again. They didn't care how, and I appreciate that. And so they actually helped me out to pay for schooling so I could get certifications for coaching. My mom and I took a trip to the beach together, and it was just a really restorative, healing time for me to share everything I had been through the past couple of years. Same for her and my family. And then I saw my family again a couple of months later after that. I think they were kind of like questioning, is this okay for her to be eating multiple pounds of meat every day? Is she really healed? Does she still have an eating disorder? But they couldn't deny what was before their eyes. They couldn't deny that I was gaining healthy weight. I was getting strong. I could string my words together again. I was socializing. Obviously, what I was doing was working. And now our relationship is better than it ever has been. They come to me for advice. I actually just finished coaching my dad. My mom asks me for recipes all the time. And I also did some coaching with my sister. So it's funny how things have turned around. And it really is just such an awkward dynamic. We don't really receive from the people closest to us. And for some reason, we have such a hard time with these things. But I'm so grateful to God that He's restored our relationships He's restored and blessed beyond what I could have ever prayed for. My mom and I are best friends. We have a really good, healthy relationship. My mom was a part of my retreat. A lot of people don't even understand autoimmune disease. A lot of people have never heard of chronic C. diff. And so it was just really awkward. A lot of friendships just kind of were put on the back burner. I didn't handle it well because when my family kind of shut me out, I was looking for a place to live. And so I was reaching out to everyone I knew, and they were just like, whoa, like, no, one, I'm sorry, I don't have a place for you to stay, but two, what is going on? So I think a lot of people were just alarmed. And so when I healed, I did have a lot of people reach out and say, I'm so happy to see God has healed you. You're doing so well. I was so worried about you. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I got a lot of those messages. And a couple of friendships were rekindled, a couple just kind of like, hey, I'm so glad you're okay. But for the most part, God really has provided new friends for this new season. I do have old friends, even one of those friendships where I just felt like I was at fault for being so triggered and toxic. And I just said, hey, our friendship meant a lot to me, and I'm really sorry for how I handled things. And they received it really well. And they're like, you have been through so much. I'm so glad to see you're doing well. But at the same time, me and this person who used to be my very best friend, we're just two different people. I don't think that everyone is supposed to stay in our lives. we don't have the same values. There are things that they do that I don't do, and things that I do that they don't do. So if we were to hang out, it's like, what are we going to do? I guess we could go get coffee, but we don't have that much in common anymore. So the Lord has blessed my husband and myself with a really wonderful church where we have new friends, we have interests that we share in common, we have amazing neighbors. I met my husband shortly after that emergency room visit where I had that surrender. I actually met him probably 10 days later. So my husband runs Airbnb. He's been an Airbnb host since he came out of the Navy. And I was just shooting out messages to random strangers on Craigslist, anywhere, looking for a place to stay because I was nearly homeless. I needed a place to go. My family had cut me off. I was too sick to be working. Even women's shelters were booked for the holidays at this time. And so I finally received a message back and he said, "Yeah, I have a bonus room. You can come stay with me." I thought he might be a creep and he said, "No, feel free to look at my reviews. I'm legitimate." So that's what I did. I went and stayed in his bonus room. That's how we met. Maybe we fell out of touch in 2020 because he closed down his Airbnb business. I had to go find somewhere else to stay. And then we reconnected a year later. He messaged me on New Year's and we just kind of caught up. When we had caught back up, that's when I fell in love with him. He was a different person. His relationship with the Lord had become real, and his hair was grown out, and he just had a different light in his eyes. And I was like, wow, I really want to be with this person. But it took him a while. So we didn't start dating until maybe a year and a half even after that. And then we got married. Here we are. So we've moved back to North Carolina, which is where my parents live. And then his mom actually moved. So she is our next door neighbor. And my parents are actually going to be building a home on our property too. So we actually have a whole homestead thing going on. And it is a dream come true. It really is amazing how God just pours out his blessings. But that's how we met. I am happily married. I have a thriving baby boy who's about to turn 10 months old, and I am thriving, definitely living from a place of hopelessness. And God changed everything. How important is my faith in this healing journey or in the healing journey? It's everything. If you don't have faith, then I don't even know what keeps people going sometimes. Faith is the anchor. Faith is a place from which I make decisions. So for most of my life, I was making decisions from a place of fear instead of faith. And when I made decisions from faith, I had so much more confidence, understanding, and it changed everything. So faith is critical. It's like an anchor and so much more, and purpose and identity. I start out my day with a workout. I have rest day on Wednesday and Sunday, but other days I work out around 4 in the morning. And then I get into the sauna, and then I go and get my baby. And then we walk while I take my first coaching call for the day. And then I make breakfast. Breakfast is usually eggs, smoked salmon, and I like to put that on baby arugula. I sometimes take tomatoes out of my tomato garden. I put fresh rosemary in my eggs. I also have a yogurt bowl with frozen berries with breakfast. Then I have homemade einkorn sourdough toast with breakfast. And then I go outside and walk. I walk David in his stroller while I do my coaching calls, or we'll just go out in the grass, play in the grass. We're outside for most of the day. And then for dinner, I only eat 2 meals a day. For dinner, I have meat, whether it be yesterday, I had a bone-in ribeye and a couple pieces of delicata squash. Today, I have bison stew. So it's just a big hunk of bison, celery, and carrots. I didn't have any onions, so that's it. That's what it looks like. I love squash. I eat a big chunk of meat, maybe a half cup to a cup of squash on the side. In the summertime, I can make low oxalate salads. I enjoy those. So like romaine lettuce, red onion, cucumber, bell peppers, and then I like to put steak on top of that. I've been making Maria Emmerich's egg pudding. She was just here for my retreat. So it's pudding made from hard-boiled or cooked eggs, and then you add collagen powder. It's really, really good. And it's a great source of protein. So that's like my dessert. Or I make my brownies for dessert, and that's what it looks like. My son is still breastfeeding, but he loves to suck on a piece of steak. He absolutely loves steak, but he doesn't have all his teeth yet, so he's primarily breastfeeding. My husband eats a lot of meat. I would say my husband is 98% carnivore. I used to be an abstainer, and now I can moderate. And that I attribute to Jesus Christ. I believe he delivered me from a binge eating disorder. So I'm able to eat things like sourdough bread or carnivore brownies without binging on them. I waited 2 years. So I think I waited longer than I needed to. But like I said, I just needed time to heal from my relationship with food. So I tried my first strawberry slice at my retreat. So I started reintroducing other things after that very, very slowly. But I generally recommend taking baby steps. So if this person is starting out with a standard American diet, I don't think you should cut your carbs cold turkey. I would cut them back to maybe 100, then 50, and then 25 over the span of a couple of weeks. I would adjust your fat and protein accordingly over the span of weeks. My minimum coaching option is 90 days because it doesn't happen overnight. It takes weeks, it takes months of consistency and troubleshooting. But for any individual, I am going to recommend start eating enough protein, at least around 1 gram of protein per pound of healthy body weight. If you're not going to eat carbs, then fat is your new primary fuel source. So give your body plenty of dietary fat so that it can learn to use fat for fuel. And I really do favor saturated fat over polyunsaturated fat. So that's going to come from your ruminant animals like beef, lamb, bison, goat, veal, and maybe less of the pork or chicken. They have different lipid profiles. And then in terms of non-animal foods, I don't think most people need to be strict carnivore or do strict lion diet like I did. I was in a really dire situation, and a lot of other people are, but I personally don't think that mushrooms are going to cause cancer. I don't think that some romaine lettuce is going to really set someone back unless they have SIBO or Candida, which can actually feed off of those things. So it depends on the individual, but some people can really have variety. It also depends on, are there foods that are going to trigger you? Like I have ketovore brownies, which are extremely low carb, like under 5 total carbs, loaded beef protein isolate. But that sweet taste can be a trigger for some people to go eat real sugar. So for that individual, it's better to not use any sweeteners. For some individuals, those brownies are like a bridge to get into this way of eating to help them get off of the sugar. So you have to identify which personality type are you? Are you a moderator or an abstainer? And those can change. Be sure that you're getting adequate sodium, plenty of sodium, because you're not eating carbs anymore. You're not eating processed foods anymore. So you've got to get your minerals and your electrolytes. And I would say those are the general places to start. What would I say for people who are looking for hope in their healing journey? I would say that there is always hope. If you are here and you can hear my voice, there is hope. You were created for a purpose. You weren't a mistake. There are no humans that were mistakenly created. That reason alone is a reason to not give up. There's so much more to your life than what you see. God has a purpose for your life. He calls us to abundance and hope and a bright future. That there is always hope. I was at literally death's door. I was just at the bottom, at the end of my rope, and God delivered me and He redeemed me and He turned it all around and blessed me beyond my wildest dreams, because that's what He does. There is always, always hope.